So it is 12:40 Eastern Time. We will go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome. I want to let you all know that this session is being recorded. My name is Dr. Sherry Crawford, and I'll be your moderator for the ADEIL conference this session. Before we begin, on behalf of ADEIL, I would like to thank our host, Troy University, and our technical coordinator, Ms. Marcy Shirley from Troy University. We're thankful for their contributions in making this event possible. And I want to thank you for joining us for this session. Pause for regular and substantive interaction. And please welcome Dr. Jennifer Robertson from the University of Arizona Global Campus. Dr. Robertson, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I thank you so much for coming to this presentation. I know you have many choices today, so I'm thrilled and honored that you are here to talk about pause for regular and substantive interaction. And I am Jen Robinson. I am a program chair and associate professor at the University of Arizona Global Campus. Our learning objectives today are a few, and they're going to be scattered into the presentation. But first and foremost, I just want to review some of the Department of Education's updated definitions of regular and substantive. That should say interaction, not feedback. My whole life is about how to give feedback, so feedback is always on my mind. And then the definitions of distance versus correspondence education. We're going to utilize a piece of the pause framework. I'll explain more about that as a way to provide substantive feedback or substantive, and then complete a tangible worksheet. So I have something to give you at the end. That is how I've been training my faculty on some of these new, not new, but put in stone regulations that to help them with their teaching and learning. So before we get started, how familiar are you with the updated definitions of regular and substantive interaction? If you could just put in the chat, you're familiar, you're not familiar, you're kind of familiar, you're still learning. Tell me where you are with that. Okay, excellent. Thanks, Gloria. Good. Good. Okay, good. Excellent. Perfect. Excellent. Okay. And so I think we're all still learning, right? We're all still figuring out how our practices are changing based on these requirements that have come out. Did I miss a slide? No, I did not. Okay. So before we go too much further, it's really important to think about these two definitions that the Department of Education has kind of solidified the difference between correspondence and distance or distance education. These two definitions are crucial to understand these requirements and how we can implement them in our classrooms. So the biggest pieces of correspondence education, it is at a distance, as is distance learning. But the difference with correspondence education is it's not regular and substantive. It's primarily initiated by the student and it's self-paced. Okay. So correspondence education is not considered distance education. And that is because in distance learning or distance education, the feedback between the instructor and student is regular, predictable, substantive. It can be asynchronous or synchronous, but it is instructor initiated. So big pieces that are different between correspondence and distance learning. And these definitions come from the Higher Learning Commission. The handout I'll pass out toward the end of the presentation has all of the references so that you can also go follow those and read for yourself if you'd like. So what does this look like? When we talk about regular and substantive, we're talking about engaging students in teaching, learning, and assessment that are consistent with the course content, but also includes two things from these menu items. One, we're providing direct instruction. We're assessing and providing feedback on students' coursework. We're providing information or responding to questions about the content of a course or a competency. And then other instructional activities approved by the institution. I think we're still learning what that is, but the biggest pieces are those first four, making sure that we're incorporating those as substantive interaction that's regular. So regular means between a student and a teacher that is predictable. So a student knows when they are going to get your feedback. They know when you're going to engage with them. And it's about the course or the content, okay? Also, the substantive interaction that's regular is monitoring the student's academic engagement. We're being prompt and proactive with our interaction, and we're making sure that we're addressing the individual needs of students on the basis of monitoring. This all seems pretty regular, right? It all seems pretty standard. However, with the stakes being really high, we want to make sure that we're really paying attention to substantive and regular interaction and what that means. And of most importance, this must be instructor initiated. It must be regular, scheduled, and predictable, and it must be focused on the course subject or the competency being covered in the course. So what does this look like? You're going to find yourself in this, but just providing some examples, personalized communication. We're saying, dear student, dear Jen, here are the specific things that you've done well. Here are specific things that are areas of opportunity for you to work on. Really personalized feedback and communication with students in the discussion or through grading. Announcements should support instruction or synthesize comments. So now when I post announcements for the week, I review what we discussed last week, give an example of what we're going to be discussing in the week ahead. Virtual office hours. So I know some faculty have virtual office hours. The difference here is that links, dates, and times are not hidden and they're predictable. If you say you're going to be there on Tuesday, students know they will be there on Tuesday, either through a phone call or teleconferencing. So it needs to be predictable and regular. One-off office hours doesn't seem to fit the definition of what the DOE is looking for. Introductory posts can be high engagement activities or discussions, things that are promoting engagement between the student and the faculty. So just having a discussion there and the instructor not engaging may not be fitting the definition of the DOE's RSI. Timely feedback, again, individualized, sharing the both strengths and weaknesses, and then recorded lectures. So interestingly, from my understanding, right, Evan, you make a good point. Self-paced means it's not regular interaction. Now, that goes back to, is it correspondence education or is it distance education? And the recorded lectures are wrapped up into that. If we record a lecture and send it out for students to watch, that's great. It's informative, but there may not be interaction there. And that interaction is what's really important. So, for example, in our discussions, I partner with Dr. Mooney, and she has created some excellent games that cover the content of what we're doing. So word searches, puzzles, drag and drops. I put those into the discussion, great. But where is my interaction about those games to monitor that students are learning from those? So those are the things we really want to think about, is if we have activities, how are we engaging with students about that content and activity? So what are the big rocks or ideas you're thinking of now? I know this has been a really quick overview, but just thinking about those things now, what are some ideas that are coming to mind for you with these updated requirements? Do you feel like you're largely meeting them? You're getting some ideas, or you're still open to learning a little more? You can just put that in the chat for me. Evan's open to learning a little more. And I think that's the stage I'm at too. I know just enough to get myself in trouble. And so we're definitely all in this learning phase. Excellent. And Ollie, this might not pertain as much to you because this is US based, but I'm curious because the way Open University does their learning might look more like correspondence education to us. It depends on how much interaction is involved. That would be an interesting conversation to compare online learning in the US and online learning in the UK or England specific. All right, so this brings us to pause. So the framework I'm going to present today is going to be helpful specifically when providing feedback. Feedback is really important, and feedback can come in many different ways. But when I think of feedback, I'm specifically thinking about the feedback I provide as an assessment. I still provide some feedback in that discussion, helping to iron out misconceptions. But when I'm thinking about feedback, I'm really thinking about those activities where they've done something and then I grade them. And I remember back to the early 1990s, it really should only be 10 years ago, right, guys? 1990 should only be 10 years ago, but it's a lot further past. My husband was deployed overseas and he was doing correspondence education with the city colleges of Chicago. And he would get this big packet in the mail, this big brown envelope, and it would be stuffed full of little workbooks and scantrons and a little letter. Hey, this is due by XYZ, but there was not really a contact information. There wasn't really a faculty member assigned to him. He had zero interaction with faculty. And back then, even if he had, it would have been by snail mail anyway. Um, and so then when he finished, he sent it back, but he had no interaction with anybody. He got a final grade, but I mean, he passed, but had he not passed, I don't know if there would have been any feedback about what he did wrong to improve. So in that case, he was not getting applicable, understandable, specific, individualized feedback about a content or a competency. And he was doing general education, English, and math courses through correspondence education. So when we are in compressed courses now, that are not the typical trimester or semester, or some of you still may be in that typical model, it can be easy to use templated feedback. I mean, as who was it? Yolanda, what is her last name? Dr. Yolanda, I can't remember her last name. I was sitting in a meeting with her the other day. She said, there are only so many ways you can say this is not accurate. And I thought, that's a really good point, but we still have to find a way to individualize the feedback we're giving. And so the Department of Education wants to see that online faculty are addressing students, one by their name, but also responding to them in a way that shows that the feedback they're getting is specific to their work, not necessarily templated or general. So pause is one way to think through providing feedback that allows us to assess what the student has done, provide personal communication, and timely individualized feedback, which is part of the DOE RSI requirements. So when I think about independent learning and online learning and putting together pause, I think about this thing I developed in my research, this framework called the Online Learning Capacity Building Continuum. It's a mouthful, but the reality is we are working with students across the transactional distance. We have this distance, we're trading information, we're trading skills across the distance. And so that continuum is between the instructor and student. But over that continuum, we include pedagogy, the information and how we're teaching, hudagogy, how to help students build the skills that they need to continue to be successful, but also andragogy, which is recognizing adult learners in their context to ensure we're teaching them in a way that is appropriate for adult learners. So each time we provide feedback across this continuum, I think about the virtual classroom and the distance, and then how can we use feedback as a way to build capacity for our students through our feedback. And so this framework came out of a study I did back in 2019 or 2020. As a program chair, I'm also a faculty evaluator. So as I go in and I'm doing walkthroughs of my faculty's courses and their teaching strategies, I noticed that one area that we really struggled with as a team was providing that specific feedback. And in high enrollment courses, the gen ed courses that are really high enrollment, this can be really challenging to give this individualized specific feedback across 40 students times 4 assignments every week. So I went to literature and tried to figure out, okay, what does research tell me about feedback? I did a lot of reading, probably 9 to 12 months of just what does research tell me? And I ended up with these 5 buckets. Research tells us that we need to have praise. What did the student do well? Our feedback needs to be applicable. What feedback can we give to the student to help them improve immediately? We need to have our feedback be understandable. And one of the things that came up in literature quite often is that as teachers, we tend to use jargon for explaining to students what they need to do. For example, the other day I was working with a PhD student. And I said, when you're writing, you have to use simple past, not past perfect. And he just kind of looked at me like, what? He's a science teacher, not an English teacher. So in that case, that was jargon in that feedback that he did not quite understand. And when you're across a distance, sometimes students will not reach out right away and say, what did you mean by past perfect? So what will the student understand my feedback free of jargon? Next, the feedback needs to be specific. So does the feedback teach? Part of the RSI requirements is that direct instruction. So providing feedback is another way to include direct instruction to help students iron out misconceptions, misunderstandings, etc. And finally, research says be encouraging. What feedback can you give to encourage your student? And I think of this almost as conditioning. Oh, I like how engaged you are. Your engagement's really robust in the discussions. Praising that behavior, I want them to continue doing. So all of this fell together into pause. And the study I did was over 16 weeks. And we had volunteer faculty who went through the study with me. I taught them this framework. I supported them for 16 weeks with their feedback, and their self-reported measure was significantly more confident providing feedback that met this paradigm after the study than before. So they found it to be very helpful. So in response to the DOE's requirements for distance education faculty, I want to highlight this middle slice of pause. So from chemistry, can anyone tell me what AU stands for? You can just type it in the chat. What does AU stand for? We're stretching our brains back to high school chemistry if we're that old. Yeah, so AU is gold. So when I think about the middle piece of pause, I'm thinking about this golden slice, the golden language that we can include in our direct instruction with our faculty, with our students. Sorry, fly. And this is an important part of feedback where we can show how we are providing the most important feedback students need to succeed not only in our class, but in their programs. And since this is instructor related, specifically about a content or competency, we are meeting the DOE RSI requirements. So feedback that is applicable and understandable with the instructor and specific to the content provides the opportunity for direct instruction, again, to iron out misunderstandings. So, and again, the stakes are really high for universities to make sure that they're doing this well. So we're going to focus on this middle piece here. So as someone who supports around 60 plus faculty, I have a nice handful of faculty. I do my best to incorporate pause in everything I do with faculty evaluations as well, but also helping faculty understand how they can use this acronym to provide just-in-time support in high enrollment courses. So I want to give you an example of what I do to integrate pause for RSI. So we have Dr. Mooney and I are the two partners for information literacy at UAGC. And we have set up a virtual faculty lounge. And both of us being teachers, we're used to having the teacher version, right? To give us tips and hints and tricks of what we can do in a course. So we took the time to create week by week guidance for our faculty. Part of this guidance is example feedback and feedback templates to show them how they can meet the RSI requirements, but incorporating pause. Part of this, though, is being very specific with feedback. And so we have indexed our weekly modules into here are the big rocks we're covering this week in students' work. If they are still struggling with the differences between scholarly and popular sources, refer them back to section 3.1 of the textbook. If they're struggling with finding an article, here's a library resource that we have incorporated into the course. Remind them that this exists and put it in the feedback. So helping students or helping faculty really focus in on that very specific applicable, understandable, immediate support that they need to be able to move forward. Because our course builds off of itself each week, these topics will come up through the following weeks as well. And I think Dr. Shaheda is here. These comes up in her course, also the English course that comes right after us. So we want them to know these things as they head into her course as well. So here's an example of how we set up feedback templates to help our faculty. Of course, always start with the individual greeting, dear Hazar or dear Jennifer. And then for a review of requirements, this is something we ask faculty to do. They don't have to do this. This is not a requirement. But I know for me, when I'm grading 40 essays and I get to number 38, by that point, I'm exhausted. I need to remember what the requirements were of the paper. So having that there not only is it reminds me, but it also reminds the student in the feedback, here are the things I was looking for in your work. And then we have some options for feedback that include that golden language. Faculty use these, they adapt them, and you can see here that I've given them a stem to start with, and then the highlights in yellow are where they need to provide that individual specific feedback. And that's where this comes in handy, this indexing. So as they're providing the feedback, we're linking them back to the very specific items that they may have missed in these requirements. So that's for a discussion. This is for an assignment, very similar. So we use Canvas for discussion grading, but we have a different system called Waypoint that we use for assignment grading. So we remind students to view the markup because faculty are leaving inline comments as well. And we talk about how to individualize those to make it into a conversation. I remind faculty that when they're grading papers, think of it as that conversation they're having with the student, and that makes it easier to put those inline comments in, especially on those days when we're absolutely exhausted. Do we have any questions so far or comments? No, I think I'm doing okay on time.
We're doing okay on time, and you have a couple of comments.
Oh, okay, let's look. I have a little bit more. Yeah, Evan, you're absolutely correct. So Evan mentions that academic units vary or send mixed messages on student help. You're correct. So at UAGC, we have a committee, a faculty council committee now who's working on this specifically. What are the standard teaching expectations for the entire university to make sure we're meeting DOE RSI requirements? And still leaving that wiggle room because some programs may have slightly different requirements where we might say, okay, we'd like you to have at least 5 minimum pieces of engagement with students in a discussion. The entry point courses, those first 2 or 3 courses may say, yeah, we want you to have a little bit more than that because we want students to really feel the presence and connection in these first few courses. So we are setting minimum standard expectations right now. We do this really well already. We're just making some revisions to make sure that we're really hitting the point of those RSI requirements, but you're absolutely correct. We're trying to move away from mixed signals into a cohesive unit of evaluation and understanding. I'll come back to the comments in just a moment. So by using pause and providing those examples for our faculty, we're showing them how they can provide that direct instruction back into their feedback. They can assess and provide feedback on the student's work. They can provide information about the content of the course, but it's also predictable, regular, and monitors the student academic engagement and success. And my guess is that many of us do this already. And it's really helpful to take a moment to figure out, okay, where do my teaching practices fit into these updated regulations? And what can I add? What can I sort of let go to make sure that I'm adding things in that are going to be the biggest bang for the buck? So I have a couple things I'm going to share with you really quickly. Let me stop sharing and share these with you. Give me just a second here. I practice this, but sometimes end show. Okay. So in the chat, I am going to put a handy dandy little, let's see if that will go. Yay, a little graphic. So this is just the PAUSE acronym in a Word file. It has the reference to the book that has the research, but also a little handy bookmark because I'm a reader and I can never find a bookmark. The other thing that I'm putting into the chat is what we're going to talk about next.
We have
And this,
about 5 minutes left.
oh, thank you. This is that tangible takeaway thing. See, this is why I practice, because I get chatty. So this is just something for you to take with you. And when I was working with my faculty, let me put that through the chat. This is something we did in one of our recent professional development meetings. We went through the checklist. So on the left side, you're going to see these different pieces: presence, the welcome messages, feedback, discussion. And we talked about what are we currently doing in our course, but then we also talked about ideas for integration. For example, when you have 40 papers to grade and you have to do it in 4 days because you're on a compressed timeline, it can be really exhausting to type for that long. So we brainstorm things like using dictation IO or dictating into Word and then copying and pasting that into Word to keep from having so much templated feedback across all 40 papers, because I want to recognize that the faculty only have a limited amount of time. Additionally, we talk a lot about using video. I use video so much. I tell my students they will get sick of my face by the end of the course, because for me, that's a way to not only build presence and to have conversations, but to also save myself from carpal tunnel syndrome. In Canvas, the speed grader does have a screencast option. I'm not sure if your universities use Canvas or if you have that screencast option, but for really providing direct instruction that's specific, applicable, and understandable to students, using that screencast to walk them through the requirements of what they did and the pieces of what they missed is really impactful, because it allows them to see, oh, I read it too quickly, I overlooked this, or I didn't think about that. It allows us to provide that direct instruction to help them move forward quickly. All right. So this brings me to the end. Any questions or comments? Trying to go back through here. Oh, thank you, Gloria. Gloria put the link to the book. Evan, how can I help you?
Well, excuse me, I wanted to know how much of these courses are connected with a degree program.
All of ours.
You may have all of them. Okay, because we found that we did that somewhat late in the game, and that can help get some standardization in how you
Yeah.
help people. But then there's also the issue of the instructor. The instructor could be a TA or something, and they may change over a lot. So there are a lot of
Yeah.
people you have to re-inform every few years or every few months so they know what the students have access to, besides the obvious.
That's a great point. We do not have TAs. We are full-time faculty and part-time faculty. And you still bring up a great point that as people are moving around, we have some faculty who teach for multiple programs. And so while we have those standard teaching expectations, faculty might be teaching different programs and there might be slight variations. We have found that faculty lounge is really helpful for helping faculty get quickly up to date with any changes we've made in our program, and then allows them to come back in and grab some feedback until they're comfortable with the changes that we've made. And to ensure that they're staying within those DOE requirements, because if we're audited, we want to be able to show that we're staying within those requirements. Any other questions or comments? How am I doing on time? Oh, I'm right to the minute.
Yes, we have 1 minute.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. Always feel free to contact me. I think my contact information is in the program. If not, I'm just at UAGC. And here are the references. This is on the worksheet I sent you. If you want to follow up more on why these requirements came along. There's a really high stakes reason why these additional requirements or the refined requirements came along. So those references are there for you. Thank you so much for coming today, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Dr. Robinson. And those of you attending, please don't forget to do your conference evaluation. Enjoy the rest of the conference.